All right, so we're going to continue on with our Bible study. Our study in. We've been talking about the last few weeks. What does the Bible say about blank? And so this week, given that it's Halloween, I wanted to bring up what does the Bible say about evil and sin. So as I've often started with these things, I want to start by kind of defining what the terms are. So as we've talked about many times before, right? We know what we know what sin is, right? We've talked about it before. We've talked about it in the past. That sin is this idea of missing the mark, that you are unable to that you're unable to achieve the goal. That it comes from archery. It comes as an archery term, and it means that you don't actually hit the target that you're going for. And it's how appropriate is it that we use this for faith and for Christianity and for our belief in God? Because the idea is that there is a set path, there is a way that we want to go, there is a target that we're aiming for, and how often and how easy is it for us to go astray or to miss or to be unable to achieve the objective. The second thing I wanted to bring up is evil. The reason I want to bring up evil is because evil, it conjures up all kinds of different things in our imaginations, especially as we come up here to Halloween today. You know, there's the things like the witches and skeletons and all these things, right? We talking about, you know, just those things, but we can also look at the Bible and we can actually see things like witchcraft and sorcery being used. We can see things like this ritualistic pagan worship, and we talked about it even last week, the idea of sacrificing your children for some god, and how awful a lot of these issues end up becoming. And so I thought to myself, you know what, I want to actually see what the Bible actually has to say about evil. And just as a complete aside, something completely unrelated to the rest of the study, if you've been with us in the Bible study, you know that the mark of the beast, we talked about it a little while ago, the mark of the beast, the number of his name is, and it's often translated today as 666. And there's always a note on the bottom of any study Bible that you read, and it'll say some earlier manuscripts translate it as 616. Okay? Not a massive difference, but it's just something noteworthy. The reason I bring this up is because as I was getting into my dive on evil and sin and stuff like that in the Bible, evil is actually used 616 times in the Bible. 616. Anyway, that was just my complete aside. When that struck, I remember I actually ended up having a complete reroute on my study when I was doing that this week. So I was like, wait, 616. It's like, I've seen this number before, and I had to go and do that. But anyway, it was just, I found that very interesting that the word evil would have that number. And so the first case I want to take a look at today, there's going to be a couple stories and a couple other little scriptures that I want to talk about. The first story I want to talk about is the story of Joseph. So if you're familiar with the story of Joseph, right, Jacob's son, and he gets sold by his brothers into slavery. He ends up going to Egypt, where he then rises in the ranks. He becomes the right hand to Pharaoh after interpreting the dreams of Pharaoh from a prisoner in a cell to the second most powerful person in the world. And then, of course, the famine that he predicted strikes, and things get really bad. So bad, in fact, that even all the way up in Canaan, where his brothers and his father still live, they are forced to go down to Egypt, the only place that prepared, to get some grain so that they can feed their families. And so they end up coming down, and they come in, and they see Joseph, but they don't realize it's Joseph. And of course, Joseph recognizes them immediately. And so he throws them this great big feast, and he invites them in, and they're, of course, completely bewildered. They don't understand what is going on. And then he sends them away. Now, in Genesis 44, which is where we want to pick up from, Genesis 44, verses 3 to 5, it says this: As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their donkeys. So this is the brothers. So they had gone only a short distance from the city, they had gone only a short distance from the city. Now Joseph said to his steward, Up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this that he practices divination? You have done evil in doing this. If you're wondering what he's talking about this cup that he used. It would have been used for pagan Egyptian rituals, of course, because of Joseph's stature in the Egyptian government. He was, of course, afforded all of these luxuries, including this goblet, which he may or may not have used, but we know that it was his possession. And none of the brothers take it, right? In fact, he actually slips it in and hides it. But the fact of the matter is, what I really want to get a hold of here is how Joseph characterizes, right? Because, and maybe you're wondering, well, of course, we understand what evil is. We know what evil is. But as I've said before, I don't want to just blindly go into something. I don't want to take a 21st century approach to Scripture that is many thousands years older than where we are right now, right? So I want to see, okay, when the Bible's talking about evil, what did they say? And what do they mean? And so when I look at it here, when I see Joseph saying, you repaid evil for good, then he's obviously holding them at opposites, right? He's saying, I did something good for you, right? I threw you a feast. I lavished you. I gave you gifts. Your life was so good. You got to come and be in luxury. You didn't have to stay at the inn like everyone else is coming. And in fact, if you remember, this is actually the second trip. The first time they went back, all of their money was with them. And so they came back with double money this time, right? Because they didn't want to make anyone upset. But of course, Joseph isn't about to take their money. So Joseph does this great big thing for them. He throws them this celebration, if you will, and then so they're still bewildered. They don't understand why or what's going on, and so of course they leave. And he refers to this action of theft, even though it's not really theft. He says that the theft was evil. And maybe you see where I'm going with this. Maybe you don't yet, but it'll certainly be obvious in the next couple passages. First, I want to go to the end of 44, where looking at verse 30 to 34, it says, Now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, then, as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant our father with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. 34. Yeah. So now therefore please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back to his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear the evil that would find my father. Okay, so you'll notice I haven't really pointed much to sin yet. And there's a reason for that. I'm really fixated on this idea of why do they use evil in this way? And once again, here they're saying, okay, this evil will find my father. As if it's almost like something alive. But more importantly, evil seems to be more of a verb, right? It's an action. It's something that happens to someone, right? It's not something that just exists. It's one of those things that you hear people say. They're like, well, if God is good, then why did he create evil? And it's like, well, evil's not a created thing. It's not. And the Bible doesn't seem to give us that impression. I don't understand why people seem to think that it's like some entity. Oh, I'm going to go get myself a nice big vat of evil today. Like that's not what it is. And if you were paying attention to how he used it then, and you see how he again uses it now, he's not actually using it as a descriptor of something, but of the quality of something. Right? Good means it's good quality, right? It's something that we want. It's something of value. It's something that we seek and earnest. And evil seems to be the exact opposite of that. It's something we do not want. It is plagues. It is calamity. It is chaos. Evil is the opposite of good, but again, it speaks to the quality, not to the thing itself. As I said, the evil is not a noun. It is a verb. It's an action. It's a result of things happening. And in this particular case, he's saying that the action of it would kill my father, it would drag him down to Sheol, that this would be an evil thing. It would not be a good thing. It would be bad. And we can understand that. And I know I'm saying things right now and you're going, okay, well, none of this seems very revolutionary. You're not exactly blowing my mind here, Pastor John, and that's fine. The point isn't to blow your mind. The point is we're trying to lay a base to understand what's going on, because when we get to the end, you'll understand where I'm getting with this. In 1 John chapter 3, verses 4, by the way, if you've never read 1 John, it's a very short book, and you should just go through like the shorter epistles at the end. They're just so good. They're just so good, and they're very short. You can read through them very quickly, and it's just full of such wisdom and encouragement and upliftingness. And so we're going to look at 1 John chapter 3, verses 4 to 12. It's a larger section, but I think it's worth reading. Because as I've said before, I like looking at the Old Testament passages, but then I like to see, did things change, later? Is the Bible any different? Especially because we're getting into different cultures, we're getting into different languages and different ways of expressing ourselves. So what does it say? And so in 1 John chapter 3, verses 4 to 12, everyone who makes a practice of sinning also practices lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. You know that he appeared in order to take away sins, and in him there is no sin. No one who abides in him keeps on sinning, and no one who keeps on sinning has either seen him or known him. Little children, let no one deceive you. Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil. No one born of God makes a practice of sinning, for God's seed abides in him, and he cannot keep on sinning, because he has been born of God. By this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one, and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil, and his brothers were righteous. Okay, so who remembers what Cain did other than murdering his brother? Right? There was an event that led to this. Yes, he offered a offering from the land, shall we say, and Abel offered up an animal. And of course, God showed favor to Abel and did not. In fact, it says that Cain's heart was evil for offering grain or fruit or whatever it was that he offered, some sort of vegetable. I don't know what to call it. He offered, but here's where you can get a little confused, I suppose. Does that mean that not offering a living sacrifice, a meat sacrifice, right, like a lamb or a ram or a goat, does that mean that that's not a good enough sacrifice? Because we read about it last week, where in fact it actually called for grain and wine to be offered to the Lord. So it doesn't seem like it's the thing in and of itself, right? This is what I was saying to you before. The fact of the matter is that the grains or the fruits of the land aren't evil in and of themselves, right? It's not a noun, it's a quality. And in this case, it's talking about the quality of the offering offered according to Cain's heart. That Cain's heart was in the wrong place. Cain's heart was in the wrong. I also want to just point out real quick before we move past this particular passage is that it says, whoever is in God or born in God, he cannot keep on sinning because he has been born of God. Well, what does that mean? We've talked about this before. So many times, right, when we say, okay, so, we're born again believers and we trust in God, and you go, well, why do I keep sinning in my life? Well, the fact of the matter is that a lot of times we live a negative relationship with sin instead of a positive relationship towards God. We say, I don't want to sin, but the fact of the matter is when you're looking at sin and you're saying, I'm trying to avoid that, then in fact you're going to miss your target every single time because you're not paying attention to what you should be doing. If you're out there playing hockey and the entire time all you're thinking is, oh man, I hope I don't drop my stick. Man, I hope I don't drop my stick. You're never going to score a goal because you're too busy focusing on the wrong thing. You got to focus on the objective, focus on the target, and everything else comes together. But again, evil here is used as a qualifier for an action. A qualifier for what was going on with Cain, right? His heart wasn't possessed of evil or composed of evil heart stuff, but his heart became evil because of the actions that he took and the decisions that he made. It's a quality thing, not a composition thing. I want to real quick go over to Hebrews chapter 3 before we go to my last story. Hebrews 3:12-14. It says, "Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. But exhort one another every day, as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin." Again, we're seeing it again and again and again. I didn't use as many examples this time as I have in the past. I was saying this to Rebecca. I was like, I think I've been going on way too long recently because I've been using so many examples. I was trying to do that to make a point that the Bible says the same thing again and again and again. But I think you guys get that. And if you want more examples, I have plenty written down for you. I'm more than glad to sit down and share with you. But this is the last example I want to use, once again, of it showing it's a quality thing, right? That sin seems to be this idea of it's a judgment call, right? Sin is either right or wrong in and of itself, right? It's saying you either hit the target or you didn't, right? You're making a judgment call. But evil seems to be saying, and it goes back to what Jesus was saying to the Pharisees, where they say, the Ten Commandments say, honor your mother and father. But you say, I'm going to give this to the Lord, so sorry, mom and dad, I can't take care of you. Instead, I'm going to give it to God. And isn't that more important? And God says, no, you're supposed to take care of them. I told you to do that. Right? Just because you gave to the Lord doesn't make it a good thing. You can give to the Lord and still be doing something evil. That's what Cain did. Cain's offering was to God, but his heart was wrong. He didn't do it in submission. He wasn't giving his best. He had an evil heart, an unbelieving heart, as Hebrews puts it. And that the unbelief in and of itself is the evil, not the heart. Which also suggests, by the way, that the evil can be purged if you have a believing heart. If a heart goes from unbelief to belief, doesn't that mean that it can no longer be evil? Because the evil is only there because it's an unbelieving heart. And so what does this look like practically? And I promise this is the last story I want to look at. I'm going to look at the broader story. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's in 2 Samuel chapter 11. And if you're familiar, you know 2 Samuel is about David. Because the Bible's got a lot to say about David. Maybe you guys can answer this for me. Is David called by God a good king or an evil king? I'll give you a hint. It starts with a G. He's a good king, right? There's a reason we still talk about him. There's a reason we still celebrate him. He did a lot of good things, right? When Joshua went into the promised land and they brought the people in, he said, okay, these are the borders, and they did the allotments, and they said, okay, now you need to go out and push out and take that land for you and your families, right? And you got to do it slowly so that it's not overtaken by the beast, but you need to go out and do it. And what ends up happening? They just fall into complacency and they don't do it. And so what happens is David comes along, David shows up as king, and he expands the territory of Israel right out to where God told them this is the allotment of the lands, and so he expanded all their territory. And he took it over for Israel. He did so many good things, right? We read about David and Goliath. We know about his service to Saul, that he would not betray one that was anointed by the Lord. We know about he wouldn't even rise up against his own son when his son betrayed him, because he felt like this was something that God would take care of, but he could not do himself. He trusted in the Lord when the Ark of the Covenant was brought into the city, right? And he danced, right, in his underwear, as people often like to point out. He was just so caught up in the Jubilee of God being with him that he broke out in celebration. This was a man after God's heart. And yet, 2 Samuel chapter 11, we're going to look at verses 2 to 4 and then 14 to 16. 2 to 4, it happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" So David sent a messenger and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanliness. Then she returned to her house. Before we go to 14 and 16, I very quickly want to point out that if you don't know who Uriah the Hittite is, Uriah the Hittite was one of David's mighty men. When David was going through having to run away from Saul, when he only had a small group of compatriots, a small group of individuals that followed him wherever he went, that were loyal to him, that served him because they knew that he was God's anointed, Uriah was one of them. This isn't just some man. This is one of his closest friends. This is the good king that we just talked about, who did all these good things, who loved God so much, and yet what does he do? He takes his friend's wife and sleeps with her. And by the way, if you didn't know, the Bible tells us we're not supposed to do that. And then in verse 14, and the worst part is the story got worse. As if that wasn't bad enough, it gets worse. In verse 14, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And in the letter he wrote, "Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting. Then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die." And as Joab was besieging the city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And then the men of the city came out, fought with Joab, and some of the servants of David among the people fell, and Uriah the Hittite died also. And then he had his friend killed to cover up his mistake. You've heard me bring this up before, but I'm going to do it again because I think it's so relevant to today. Right? Here we see a good man, a man after God's heart, who is capable of some pretty great evil acts. Wouldn't you agree? Not only did he take his wife, he then killed him to hide the fact that if you read the in between there, he actually impregnates Bathsheba, and he's trying to hide up the fact that she's pregnant and that it was him, right? So he does all this other deception that goes on, and it's a terrible low time for David. But just to point out that he here was a great man that was able to do some great acts of evil. And here's the thing that the last story I want to talk about. It's not in the Bible. This is just an extra story. You've heard me talk about the Nuremberg Trials before. In fact, I've brought this very story up before when they were bringing in one of the camp survivors into the trial to bear witness to the guilt of one of the men standing on trial. He came into the courtroom, looked up, he saw the man sitting on the stand, and immediately broke down and lost control and began to weep. And so, of course, they try and get the guy together, and he can't bring himself together. And they asked him, it's like, well, was it just too much? Was it too much to see your oppressor like that again? And he said, no. When I looked up there, all I saw was a man. And then I recognized that a man was able to do such evil to other men, that I am capable of doing such evil to someone else. Friends, the reason that I went through all this, the reason I brought it all up, as we look at evil and sin, we can often try and say, well, we're on the good side, right? I'll do these things and it washes away my evil. I'll do these things and I'll get rid of it, as if it's something to just be removed. But the fact of the matter is, and I want this to really stay with you, it's not a substance thing, it's a quality thing. That you can be doing the right things, you can be doing the things that God asked you to do, but if you do them with evil in your heart, if you do them with a bad quality, a not good quality, then it doesn't matter how much service you do to the poor. It doesn't matter how much praise you give to God. Right? And David has to pay for this. In 2 Samuel 11, if you know, David has to pay a penance. That he does not get away with this. And he knows it. He knows he did wrong. And he repents and he does change. But he realized that he let evil come into his heart and that he did this horrible, terrible, not good thing. And each and every one of us needs to recognize that that is a possibility inside of us as well. That if King David, a man after God's own heart, a man anointed by God at such a young age, a man that was used by God to accomplish such amazing things, who witnessed the power of God firsthand, if he could fall to evil, if he could fall to the wickedness that is inside our hearts, then the only antidote we have against it is to continue to stay on target, to stay on the path, to go after God, because there's nothing that we can do to suppress it. It's a God-shaped issue in our heart. It's a God-sized problem that we have. I bring this up because it's so easy, as Jesus pointed out, to cast aspersions and to say, "Yo, look at this thing that you're doing, that's evil. Oh, look at this thing that you're doing, that's sin." And what does Jesus say? He says, take the log out of your own eye before you're trying to help your neighbor get the sliver out of his. That you got enough problems on your own and you need to fix your own shit before you bother trying to fix everyone else. So this isn't me calling out anyone in particular, by the way. I just want to make that clear. The point is that we all have things going on in our lives. We all have bitterness and wickedness. We all have spite and anger. We all have all kinds of things that are going on inside each and every one of us, and our only antidote is to go after God. As we talked about last week, we need to actually really worship Him, to go after Him, to serve Him, to pledge to Him, to give over our allegiance to Him. And only then, when we do that, as Hebrews tells us, then there's that seed of God that's inside each and every one of us. We're born again, and we don't have to worry about the wickedness anymore. Why? Because we're pursuing God. And if we pursue after God, then there is no wickedness that can stop us.